Chapter 3. After dressing, Stepan Arkadyevich sprayed himself with scent, adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, put cigarettes, wallet, matches, a watch with a double chain and seals into his pocket with an accustomed gesture, and, having shaken out his handkerchief, feeling himself clean, fragrant, healthy, and physically cheerful despite his misfortune, went out, springing lightly with each step, to the dining room, where coffee was already waiting for him, and next to the coffee, letters and papers from the office. He sat down and read the letters. One was very unpleasant, from a merchant who was buying wood on his wife's estate. This wood had to be sold, but now, before the reconciliation with his wife, it was out of the question. The most unpleasant thing here was that it was a mixed financial interest into the impending matter of their reconciliation, and the thought that he might be guided by those interests, that he might seek a reconciliation with his wife in order to sell the wood, was offensive to him. Having finished the letters, Stepan Arkadyevich drew the office papers to him, quickly leafed through the 2 files, made a few remarks with a big pencil, then pushed the files away and started on his coffee. Over coffee, he unfolded the still damp morning newspaper and began to read it. Stepan Arkadyevich subscribed to and read a liberal newspaper, not an extreme one, but one with the tendency to which the majority held. And though neither science, nor art, nor politics itself interested him, he firmly held the same views on all these subjects as the majority, and his newspaper did, and changed them only when the majority did, or rather, he did not change them, but they themselves changed imperceptibly in him. Stepan Arkadyevich chose neither his tendency nor his views, but these tendencies and views came to him themselves, just as he did not choose the shape of a hat or frock coat, but bought those that were in fashion. And for him who lived in a certain circle, and who requested some mental activity such as usually develops with maturity, having views was as necessary as having a hat. If there was a reason why he preferred the liberal tendency to the conservative one, also held to by many in his circle, it was not because he found the liberal tendency more sensible, but because it more closely suited his manner of life. The Liberal Party said that everything was bad in Russia, and indeed Stepan Arkadyevich had many debts and decidedly too little money. The Liberal Party said that marriage was an obsolete institution and was in need of reform, that marriage Stepan Arkadyevich chose neither his tendency nor his views, but these tendencies and views came to him themselves, just as he did not choose the shape of a hat or a frock coat, but bought those that were in fashion. And for him, who lived in a certain circle and who required some mental activity such as usually develops with maturity, having views was as necessary as having a hat. If there was a reason why he preferred the liberal tendency to the conservative one, also held by many in his circle, it was not because he found the liberal tendency more sensible, but because it more closely suited his manner of life. The Liberal Party said that everything was bad in Russia, and indeed Stepan Arkadyevich had many debts and decidedly too little money. The Liberal Party said that marriage was an obsolete institution and was in need of reform, and indeed family life gave Stepan Arkadyevich little pleasure and forced him to lie and pretend, which was so contrary to his nature. The Liberal Party said, or rather implied, that religion was just a bridle for the barbarous past of the population, and indeed Stepan Arkadyevich could not even stand through a short prayer service without aching feet, and could not grasp the point of all these fearsome and high-flown words about the other world, when life in this one could be so merry. At the same time, Stepan Arkadyevich, who liked a merry joke, sometimes took pleasure in startling some simple soul by saying that if you wanted to pride yourself on your lineage, why stop at Ulrich and renounce your first progenitor, the ape. And so the liberal tendency became a habit with Stepan Arkadyevich, and he liked his newspaper as he liked a cigar after dinner for the slight haze it produced in his head. He read the leading article, which explained that in our time it was quite needless to raise the cry that radicalism was threatening to swallow up all the conservative elements, and that it was the government's duty to take measures to crush the hydra of revolution. That, on the contrary, in our opinion, the danger lies not in the imaginary hydra of revolution, but in a stubborn traditionalism that impedes progress, and so on. He also read yet another article, a financial one, in which mention was made of Bentham and Mill, and fine barbs were shot at the ministry. With his peculiar quickness of perception, he understood the meaning of each barb, by whom, and against whom, and on what occasion it had been aimed. And this, as always, gave him a certain pleasure, but today this pleasure was poisoned by the recollection of Matryona Filimonovna's advice and of the unhappy situation at home. He also read about Count Buste, who was rumored to have gone to Wiesbaden, and about the end of gray hair, and about the sale of a light carriage, and a young person's offer of her services, but this information did not, as formerly, give him a quiet, ironic pleasure. Having finished the newspaper, a second cup of coffee, and a kalach with butter, he got up, brushed the crumbs from his waistcoat, and, expanding his broad chest, smiled joyfully, not because there was anything especially pleasant in his heart. The smile was evoked by good digestion. But this joyful smile at once reminded him of everything, and he turned pensive. Two children's voices. Stepan Arkadyevich recognized the voices of Grisha, the youngest boy, and Tanya, the eldest girl, were heard outside the door. They were pulling something and tipped it over. "I told you not to put passengers on the roof," the girl shouted in English. "Now pick it up." All is confusion, thought Stepan Arkadyevich. Now the children are running around on their own. And going to the door, he called them. They abandoned the box that stood for a train and came to their father. The girl, her father's favorite, ran in boldly, embraced him, and hung laughing on his neck, delighting, as always, in the familiar smell and scent coming from his side whiskers. Kissing him finally on the face, which was red from bending down and radiant with red tenderness, the girl unclasped her hands and was going to run out again, but her father held her back. "How is Mamma?" he asked, his hand stroking his daughter's smooth, tender neck. "Good morning," he said, smiling to the boy who greeted him. He was aware that he loved the boy less, and always tried to be fair, but the boy felt it and did not respond with a smile to the cold smile of his father. "Mamma? Mamma's up," the girl replied. Stepan Arkadyevich sighed. That means again she didn't sleep all night, he thought. And is she cheerful? The girl knew that there had been a quarrel between her father and mother, and that her mother could not be cheerful, and that her father ought to know it, and that he was shamming when he asked about it so lightly. And she blushed for him. He understood it at once and also blushed. I don't know, she said. She told us not to study, but to go for a walk to Grandma's with Miss Hull. Well, then, go, my Toncharochka. Ah, yes, wait, he said, still holding her back and stroking her tender little hand. He took a box of sweets from the mantelpiece where he had put it yesterday, and gave her two, picking her favorites, a chocolate and a cream. For Grisha? The girl said, pointing to the chocolate. Yes, yes. And stroking her little shoulder once more, he kissed her on the nape of the neck and let her go. The carriage is ready, said Matvey, and there's a woman with a petition to see you, he added. Has she been here long? Asked Stepan Arkadyevich. Half an hour or so. How often must I tell you to let me know at once? I had to give you time for your coffee, at least, Matvey said in that friendly, rude tone at which it was impossible to be angry. Well, quickly, send her in, said Oblonsky, wincing with vexation. The woman, Mrs. Karenina, a staff captain's wife, was petitioning for something impossible and senseless, but Stepan Arkadyevich, as was his custom, sat her down, heard her out attentively without interrupting, and gave her detailed advice on whom to address and how, and even wrote, briskly and fluently, in his large, sprawling, handsome and clear handwriting, a little note to the person who could be of help to her. Having dismissed the captain's wife, Stepan Arkadyevich picked up his hat and paused, wondering whether he had forgotten anything. It turned out that he had forgotten nothing except what he had wanted to forget, his wife. Ah, yes. He hung his head, and his handsome face assumed a wistful expression. Shall I go or not? He said to himself, and his inner voice told him that he should not go, that there could be nothing here but falseness, that to rectify, to repair their relations was impossible, because it was impossible to make her attractive and arousing of love again, or to make him an old man incapable of love. Nothing could come of it now but falseness and deceit, and falseness and deceit were contrary to his nature. But at some point I'll have to. It can't remain like this, he said, trying to pluck up his courage. He squared his shoulders, took out a cigarette, lit it, took 2 puffs, threw it into the mother-of-pearl ashtray, walked with quick steps across the gloomy drawing-room, and opened the other door to his wife's bedroom. End of chapter 3.